Hi everyone, it's Miss Mileham again with the Lemonade War. And the last time that I started reading, actually my video got cut off a couple pages before the end of chapter 2. So I'm going to start reading there and then we're going to go on to read chapter 3. In the garage, she found Evan and Scott Spencer. Weird, she thought. Evan doesn't even like Scott Spencer. Evan doesn't even like Scott Spencer. They've been on again, off again, on again, friends from kindergarten. But ever since Scott had purposefully put Evan's bike helmet under the wheel of the Tresky's minivan so that Mrs. Tresky ran over it when she backed out, the friendship had definitely been off. Jessie looked from Evan to Scott and back again. Now she had no idea what to say. "I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Evan," didn't seem to make much sense when Evan was obviously having fun with his friend. She tried to think of something else to say. All she could come up with was, "What are you doing?" The boys were bent over a piece of cardboard. Evan was writing letters with a skinny red felt-tipped pen. The purple cooler was in the middle of the garage and 2 plastic chairs were stacked on top of it. On top of the chair was a brown paper bag. "Nothing," said Evan, not looking up. Jessie walked over to the boys and peered over Evan's shoulder. "Lemonade, 50 cents. She said, "You spelled lemonade wrong. It's an O, not an I." But she thought, "Oh good, a lemonade stand, my favorite thing to do." The boys didn't say anything. Jessie saw Evan's mouth tighten up. "You want me to make the lemonade?" she asked. "Already made," said Evan. "I could decorate the sign," she said. "I'm good at drawing butterflies and flowers and things." Scott snorted. "Huh? We don't want girl stuff like that on our sign." "Do you want to use my lockbox to keep the money in? It's got a tray with separate compartments for all the different coins." "Nope," said Evan, still working on the sign. "Well," she said, looking around, "I can clean the table for you." The small wooden table, still covered in black streaks, was pushed up against the bikes. "We're not using it," said Evan. "But we always use the table for a stand," said Jessie. Evan pushed his face in her direction. "We don't want it." Jessie took a couple of steps back. Her insides felt runny, like a fried egg that hasn't cooked enough. She knew she should just go back into the house, but for some reason her legs wouldn't move. She stood still, her bare feet rooted to the cool cement. Scott whispered something to Evan and the 2 boys laughed, low and mean. Jessie swayed toward the door, but her feet stayed planted. She couldn't stand it that Evan wanted to be with Scott, who was a real jerk, more than her. "Hey," she said, "I bet you need change. I've got a ton. You can have all my change, as long as you pay it back at the end of the day." "We don't need it," said Evan. "Yeah, you do," insisted Jessie. "You always need change, especially in the beginning. You'll lose sales if you can't make change." Evan capped the pen with a loud snap and stuck it in his pocket. "Scott's bankrolling us. His mom keeps a change jar, so we've got plenty." The boys stood up. Evan held the sign for Scott to read, turning his back on Jessie. "Awesome," said Scott. Jessie knew the sign was not awesome. The letters were too small and thin to read from a distance. Evan should have used a fat marker instead of a skinny felt-tip pen. Everybody knew that. There weren't any pretty decorations to attract customers, and the word lemonade was spelled wrong. Why wouldn't Evan take a little help from her? She just wanted to help. Scott turned to her and said, "Are you really going to be in the 4th grade this year?" Jessie's back stiffened. "Yep," she said. "Wow, that's so freaky." "Is not," she said, sticking her chin out. "Is too," said Scott. "I mean, you're a 2nd grader and now you're going to be a 4th grader? That's just messed up." Jessie looked at Evan, but he was busy taping the sign to the cooler. "Lots of people skip grades," said Jessie. "It's not that big of a deal." "It's completely weird," said Scott. "I mean, you miss everything from a whole year. You missed the whole unit on Antarctica, and that was the best. And the field trip to the aquarium and the thing where we sent letters all over the country. Remember that, Evan? You got that letter from Alaska. That was so cool." Evan nodded, but he didn't look up. It's not that big of a deal, said Jessie again, her voice stretched tight like a rubber band. It's like you miss a whole year of your life, Scott said. It's like you're going to die a whole year earlier than the rest of us because you never had third grade. Jessie felt cold and hot at the same time. Part of her wanted to yell, "That doesn't make any sense." But the other part of her felt so freakish, like Scott had just noticed that she had 3 legs. Evan stood up and tossed the paper bag to Scott. Then he grabbed the plastic chairs with one hand. "Come on, let's go." He reached down to grab one handle of the cooler. Scott grabbed the other, and together they lifted it and began to walk out of the garage. "Hey, Evan," said Jessie, calling to their backs. "Can I come too?" "No," he said, without turning around. "Come on, please. I'll be a big help. I can do lots of things." "You're too young," he said sharply. "You're just a baby." The boys walked out. "You're just a baby." Jessie couldn't believe Evan had said that after all the stuff they've done together, and he was only 14 months older than she was, hardly even a full year. She was about to yell back something really harsh, something stinging and full of bite like, "Oh yeah," when she heard Scott say to Evan, "Man, I can't believe you have to be in the same class as your little sister. If that happened to me, I'd move to South America." "Yeah, tell me about it," replied Evan, crossing the street. The words died on Jessie's lips. She watched Evan walk away, getting smaller and smaller. He was deserting her. He wasn't going to stand by her at school. He wasn't going to smooth the way for her. He was going to be on the other side, with all of them, looking down on her, telling everyone that she was too young to be part of the crowd, telling everyone that she didn't belong. "Fine for you, Evan Tresky," she said as she marched into the house, her fists balled up at her sides. "I don't need you. I don't need you to have fun. I don't need you to run a lemonade stand, and I don't need you to make friends in the 4th grade. Halfway up the stairs, she stopped and shouted, "And I'm not a baby!" That's the end of chapter 2. Chapter 3 is called Joint Venture. Joint venture. 2 or more people joining forces to sell a certain amount of goods or to work on a single project. When the goods are sold or the project is finished, the joint venture ends. "Your sister is really..." "Shut up," said Evan. "Huh? Just shut up. She's okay. She doesn't... Look, she's okay, so just shut up." "Yeah, okay," said Scott, holding up his free hand to show he meant peace. Evan was getting abuse on both sides. The heavy cooler was banging against the inside leg with every step, and the plastic chairs were scraping against his outside leg. Bruised and bloodied, he thought to himself, all for the fun of hanging out with Scott Spencer. Why couldn't Jack have been home, or Ryan? And why did Adam have to be at the Cape this week? It stunk. "How far are we walking?" grunted Scott. "Just to the corner." Evan watched as drops of sweat fell off his face and landed on the hot sidewalk. "We should have stayed in the driveway. It was shaded." "The corner's better. Trust me," said Evan. He remembered when Jessie had said the same words to him last summer. They were setting up a lemonade stand together, and Evan had been grumbling about dragging the cooler across the street and down 2 houses, just like Scott. But Jessie had insisted. "There's a sidewalk on this side," she said, "so we'll get the foot traffic coming in both directions, and people in cars coming around the curve will have time to see us and slow down. Besides, there are a bunch of little kids on the side street, and their mothers won't want them crossing Damon Road. The corner's better. Trust me." And she was right. They'd made a ton of money that afternoon. It took 10 seconds to set up the lemonade stand. Evan unfolded the chairs and sat one on each side of the cooler. Scott tilted the sign toward the street for maximum effect. Then they both sat down. "Man, is it hot," said Evan. He took off his baseball cap and wiped the sweat from his face with his shirt. Then he grabbed an ice cube from the cooler, balanced it on his head, and stuck his cap back on. "Yeah," said Scott, "I'm thirsty." He reached into the paper bag and pulled out a cup. It was one of those large red plastic cups that vendors use at professional baseball games. Then Scott took one of the pitchers from the cooler and filled the cup to the brim with lemonade. "Hey, not so much," said Evan, pouring himself a cup too, but only part way. He glugged down half of his drink. Not bad, he thought. though he noticed a dead fruit fly floating on the top. His mom had been battling a mad fruit fly infestation ever since the weather had turned really warm. The kitchen sink area where they kept their fruit bowl was dotted with tiny, feathery fruit fly corpses. Scott drained his cup and tossed it on the ground. "Ah," he said, satisfied. "That was good. I'm going to have another." Evan reached for the trash cup and stowed it under his seat. "Nah, come on, Scott. You're going to drink all our profits if you do that." He stretched his legs out by putting his feet on top of the cooler. "Just chill." "I'm going to chill by having another cup," said Scott. There it was, that mean bite in Scott's voice. Evan's shoulders tensed up. "Move your feet," said Scott. "It's hot out here." "Dude, you're..." Evan sat up expectantly and looked down the street. "Hey, here comes our first customers." A mother pushing a double stroller came into view. At the same time, one of the kindergartners from down the street rode her bike up, noticed the signs, and quickly pedaled back to her house. Within 5 minutes, there was a small crowd of neighborhood kids and pedestrians buying lemonade from the stand. Evan let Scott handle all the money while he took care of pouring and the sweet talk. That's what his mother called it, when a salesperson chatted them up. "Trust me," she had once told Evan and Jesse, "buying something is only half about getting something. The other half is all about the human contact." Mrs. Tresky knew about these things because she was a public relations consultant. She'd even written a booklet called 10 Bright Ideas to Light Up Your Sales for one of her clients. And Evan was like her. He was good at talking with people, even grown-ups. It was easy for him, so he kept the conversation flowing along with the lemonade. People hung around. Most of them bought a second cup before they left. Evan was so busy he almost didn't notice Jessie flying out of the garage on her bike and riding down the street toward town. Good riddance, he thought, but at the same time, he wondered where she was going. During a lull in business, Evan walked up around the stand, picking up discarded plastic cups. Scott sat in his chair, jingling the coins in his pocket. "Man, we are going to be so rich," said Scott. "I bet we made $5 already." "I bet we made 10. How much you think we made?" Evan shrugged. He looked at the stack of used cups in his hand and counted the rims. 14. They'd sold 14 cups so far, and each cup of lemonade cost 50 cents. Evan heard Mrs. DeFazio's voice in his ear. Mrs. DeFazio had been his third-grade teacher, and she'd done everything she could to help Evan with his math. If one cup of lemonade sells for 50 cents and you sell 14 cups, how much money have you made? Word problems. Evan hated word problems, and this one was impossible anyway. He was pretty sure the right equation was 14 times 50. But how was he supposed to solve that? That was double-digit multiplication. There was no way he could do a problem like that. And besides, some of those 14 cups, people had bought refills but used the same cup. How many? Evan didn't know. Still, he knew they'd made a pretty good amount of money. That estimate was close enough for him. "How much do you think we could make if we sold it all?" asked Scott. "I don't know," said Evan. "Maybe $20. That sounded high, even to him, but Evan was an optimist. "Do you really think?" Both boys looked in the cooler. 3 pitchers were empty. They only had half a pitcher left. "You were pouring the cups too full," said Scott. "You should have poured less in each one." "You're the one who brought the huge plastic cups. You could fit a gallon in one of those," said Evan. "Besides, I wasn't going to be chintzy. They're paying a whole $50 for it. They deserve a full cup. And anyway, we can just go home and make more. My mom has cans of lemonade in the freezer." "Oh, yes, Your Majesty. Oh, High Commander, Your Infiniteness. Why don't you go make it?" "'Cause I'm chillin'," said Scott, leaning back in his chair with a stupid grin on his face. Evan knew he was just joking, but this was exactly why he didn't like Scott. He was always thinking of himself, always looking for some way to come out on top. If they were playing knockout, Scott always came up with a new rule that helped him win. If they were doing an assignment together, Scott always figured out how to divide it so he had less work to do. The kid was a weasel. No two ways about it. But everyone else was out of town. Evan didn't want to spend the day alone, and Jessie was on his poop list, as Mom called it, when the dog did something he wasn't supposed to do. Evan might never play with Jessie again. Evan crossed the street and went into the house. He was surprised to find that there were no more cans of lemonade in the freezer. Wow, there'd been so many this morning. Luckily, there was a can of grape juice in the freezer and a bottle of ginger ale in the fridge. It'll work, he thought. People just want a cold drink. They don't care if it's lemonade. He mixed up the grape juice at the sink. The fruit flies were more out of control than ever, thanks to the lemonade the boys had dribbled on the countertop. Evan swatted a couple, but most of them drifted out of his reach and settled on the fruit bowl. He wished his mother believed in chemical warfare, but for Mrs. Tresky, it was all natural or nothing. Usually nothing. When he went back outside to the lemonade stand, Evan noticed that the last pitcher was turned upside down on the cooler. "Aw, come on, Scott," he said. "What? It was hot, and you said we could always make more." "Yeah, well, we didn't have as much at the house as I thought. I've got grape juice and ginger ale." "I hate ginger ale," Scott said. "I wouldn't give you a penny for it." It turned out that a lot of people felt the same way. Business was definitely slower. The day got hotter. The sun beat down on them so ferociously that it was easy to imagine the sidewalk cracking open and swallowing them whole. Fanning himself, Evan asked, "How much money do you think we could make?" "I don't know," said Scott, pushing his baseball cap down over his eyes. "I mean, on a hot day like this," Evan said, silently adding the words, "or tomorrow. If we sold 8 pitchers of lemonade, what do you think we'd each make?" 8 pitchers? I don't know. Scott shook his head. His baseball-capped face wagged back and forth. Too hot for math. And it's summer. Evan pulled the red pen out of his pocket and started to write on the palm of his hand. 8 times question mark. 8 times 50 question mark divided by 2. That didn't seem right. Jessie would know. She'd do that math in a second. Evan capped the pen, jammed it into his pocket. "But I bet it's a lot," said Evan. "I bet on a hot day like this, we could actually make some real money in the lemonade business." "Yeah," said Scott. "Then we'd be rich, and I'd get an Xbox, the new one, with the dual controls." "I'd get an iPod," said Evan. He'd been saving for one for over a year. But every time he had some money put away, well, it just disappeared. Like the $10 from Grandma. She'd even written in her card, "Here's a little something to help you get that music thing you want." But the money was gone. He'd treated Paul and Ryan to slices of pizza at Townhouse. It had been fun. "That would be so great, to listen to music whenever I want," said Evan. "I could tune you out," he added in his own head. They sat in silence, feeling the heat suck away every bit of their energy. Evan was hatching a plan. The heat wave was supposed to last 5 days. If he had a friend, not Scott, set up a lemonade stand every day for 5 days, he'd definitely have enough to buy an iPod. He imagined himself wearing it as he walked to school, wearing it on the playground. "Hey, Megan." "Yeah, it's my iPod." "Sweet, huh?" Wearing it in class when the teacher droned on about fractions and percents. Nah, but it would be cool. At least there would be one thing that didn't totally stink about going back to school. After 2 hours, they decided to call it quits. Sales had dropped off fast and then stopped altogether. "Hey, did you notice something?" asked Evan, stacking the chairs. "What?" said Scott. "When we started the stand, most of our business came from that direction." He pointed down the street toward the curve in the road. "But after an hour, not one person who walked by from that direction bought a cup. Not one. They all said no thanks and kept on walking." "Why do you think?" "Dunno," said Scott. "Boy, you're a real go-getter," said Evan. "You know that?" Scott socked him in the chest, but Evan defended and knocked Scott's cap off. While Scott was scrambling for his hat, Evan said, "Just hang here for a minute, okay?" and set off down the street. As soon as he rounded the curve, he knew why business had fallen off so badly. There was Jessie and Megan Moriarty from his class. They were standing inside a wooden booth, and their sign said it all. Lemonade, frosty, delicious, thirst-quenching. Wow, and only 50 cents per cup. By the looks of it, their business was booming. Evan watched as Jessie accepted a fistful of dollar bills from a mother surrounded by kids, and at that moment, Jessie looked up and saw him. Evan had a weird feeling, like he'd been caught cheating on a test. He wanted to run and hide somewhere. Instead, he froze. What would Jessie do? He couldn't believe it. She sneered at him. She cocked her head to the side and gave him this little, "I'm so much better than you" smile. And then she waved the money in her hand at him. She waved it as if to say, "Look how much better we've done selling lemonade. Bet you can't beat that." Evan turned on his heel and walked away. Behind him, he could hear Megan Moriarty laughing at him, clear as a bell. That's the end of chapter 3. Again, we're very thankful to the publishing company, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, for allowing us to read these out loud during this time. So I will be back tomorrow probably with the next chapter. I hope you're enjoying this book. Stay safe.